9th Waldeboro Planning Board meeting, calling to order. We have got 3 members at the table, Mark Stoltz, Barbara Boardman, and Johnny, blanking out on your last name, Johnny?
Cosno.
Cosno. And Max Johnson is here, and on Zoom is Brendan McGurl, our chairperson, who is far away.
Yep, we can hear you.
Great.
And I think that's it, right?
How do we want to do this tonight? I don't know that it makes a lot of sense for me to chair this meeting remotely.
I think tonight it's going to be a bit different anyways, since it's mostly going to be ordinance revisions. Whoever's going to be the chair will pretty much just go over ordinance changes or going through the agenda. So I'm fine either way.
I'm sorry, my computer was muted. I couldn't hear what you were saying.
We're going to be going over mostly ordinance items and
Right.
correspondence that I've had, so whoever is going to be the chair will mostly just walk through the agenda. So it's fine either way. I'm fine even just moderating the meeting if people would prefer that.
Probably go faster.
Okay.
if I do it.
All right.
Do you want to do it, Brendan, or what?
I guarantee there's going to be some kind of problem, and it
Okay.
doesn't make sense for me to do it. So
Okay.
All right.
All right, we'll let Max kind of lead the
All right.
troops here.
So going through
sounds
these.
good.
So there has been a quorum that was determined. Are there any adjustments to the agenda? Considering the audience we have tonight, we might move the site plan updates to the first order of old business. But that will depend on that. Does anyone have any issues if we do that? Okay. Citizens' comments. I do see a few people in the audience. Something I would like to clarify is that we are not reviewing any applications tonight. Last month we had 370 Hendrickson Lane and we had 926 Main Street. Both of those did not provide me any updated application materials for tonight's meeting, and so they are not being reviewed or approved. The site plan updates that I have later on are just correspondence I've had for questions that were brought up at that meeting for the planning board to be aware of. So with that in mind, are there any comments from the citizens about items not on the agenda tonight? All right. Hearing none.
So are we going to discuss that feedback that you got on those other projects without the people, the applicants here, or are we going to wait until they come before us again?
It's more, I'm just showing you what I've done, and you do not have to comment, or if you have any other questions, if something's not clear, then I can clear that up while we still have the time before,
Okay.
if they come back.
Got it.
All right. So with that, we have the minutes. First is January 12th, 2023. Susan gave me an update. Susan's comment was, please see omission on page 2 with borrow pit. But that is the only note I have.
Omission, did you say?
Susan, can you explain what the note is?
No.
That is
Not off the top of my head. I'm sorry. Didn't I write?
Yeah, I
did-
I see that there is just a few edits, such as he appreciates the site visit. It's just minor word insertions. That's it.
Minor word changes.
Yep.
Not changing meaning of anything, okay.
No. It's more clarity. Does anyone else have any comments or changes for the January 12th minutes?
I put forward a motion to accept the minutes as written for January 12th,
Or as amended for Susan's notes?
as amended.
For Susan, yeah.
I'll second it.
Barbara made the motion. Mark seconded. Are there any comments or any discussion?
I had a couple of comments that I had sent to Susan, but I don't think they really matter or make an impact on what happened at the meeting. I'm fine accepting them.
Okay.
I would hope that I had incorporated your comments, Brendan.
Yeah, and I had assumed that you had. I had a couple of points that I had added in there, and it's possible that maybe I'm looking at the wrong version, but on page 2 in the second paragraph, I noted that Gartley and Dorsky was listed as an engineer, but they're not involved in the project.
Oh, wait a minute.
Okay.
Where is that? What paragraph is that?
It's in the second paragraph, last sentence on the second page.
I'm sorry, I don't see it. If Max knows where it is, he can tell me what it is after the meeting. I don't
I'm-
hold everybody up.
So it's removed, so does that mean it's
I'm-
taken care of?
No, it might just not have been included in this. We can make that amendment as well. It would just be approved with Brendan's notes as well.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, it doesn't really affect significantly anything that is going on there. I had a couple of other notes about the missing restoration plan, which was required by Knox Lincoln County Soil Conservation Service that he produced during the meeting, and that it was supposed to be included in his resubmission. And that was really the only other significant note that I had.
Why don't you resend that to Max so that we're sure that it gets included in the file copy?
And we can still approve as amended as long as we're fine with that being included in the motion.
Okay.
All right. Any other discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? And then Brendan? Aye. Yep, 4-0. Next is the February 9th minutes.
The only thing I wanted to say, and I'm not saying this in time, is that regarding the vote, it doesn't say why we tabled the vote, tabled the site plan. In fact, it doesn't summarize why. And I find that kind of peculiar for the minutes.
I know that the board tabled it. I don't know if someone stated a reason, which is fine.
Well, they needed to say how far they were from the wetlands. We needed to see the wetlands info.
Okay. So that's just amendment we can make to the minutes, that it should read it was tabled until the applicant can provide a detailed map on the setbacks from the wetlands.
Right. I think that would do it.
And then I think there was also it is in the minutes about the gray water as well.
Okay. Are there any other comments? Is there a motion?
I motion to approve the minutes as written with the amendments of adding the information about the required
Table.
wetlands information on if the applicant comes to resubmit.
Okay. Barbara made the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mark made the second. Further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
3 here. And Mark said aye. 4-0. All right. So that's the minutes. So old business, and we'll start with the site plans first. So following the meeting, I sent a few of the questions that were raised from the applications to the Maine DEP, Colin Clark, as well as the Maine Municipal Association's legal department, and who answered my questions. It was probably Garrett. I don't think I have it here, but he usually responds to my questions. So the questions boil down to what DEP and MMA considers a developed site, because that was brought up during the planning board application for 370 Hendrickson Lane. And both Colin and the MMA have kind of pointed out that it's their personal opinions. It's overall going to be a decision by the planning board, or if you want, you can speak to the town attorney as well. Colin,
You mean, as far as what defines a developed
develop,
site?
yes. Overall, it's the decision made by the planning board based on the information you want to use.
Max, would it be proper to have the attorney come to a meeting, or do we meet them separately? Because, I mean, I'm no lawyer.
Right.
And I don't want to
Well,
impart that I'm knowledgeable about the law, so wouldn't,
so the MMA attorney probably wouldn't be coming to any of these meetings,
Yeah, but-
that's why I usually do it out.
Sure.
The town attorney is
Sure.
someone, if the planning board feels it is necessary to talk to them, I would talk to the attorney first and then get
Right.
their opinion on it. Usually that saves a little more time.
okay.
But I'll go through what the comments were. Colin pretty much cited some of the definitions that we also do have in our ordinance, such as development, hazard tree, and individual private campsite, that do include the words site improvement or developed. And I think those are the two, at least for that.
Can you scan for developed area in the whole ordinance and have it come up?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good.
But-
It's like, how did you do this?
Well, that's also what Colin did as well.
Okay, wow.
Because we have a similar shoreland ordinance to what the state requires. I think we are a little more strict in a few areas like tree cutting. But that means we also have the same definitions as well as Chapter 1000. So he points out those definitions, but also just wants to stress it's his personal take, and that's it. And then for MMA, they cited page 15-8 in our ordinance for development, which is the same thing that Colin referenced as well, or Colin referenced as well.
Where are you now?
15-8 in the Waldeboro land use ordinance,
Did you copy it?
or no, it's the letter from the MMA. They noted it's a very broad definition that is not just limited to structures. And again, they leave it to the planning board on what details you are going to use to cover that.
Do you see where it is? I don't see where it is. 15-8?
Oh, no, hold on. So there's this letter,
Yeah.
and it's the first big paragraph, I believe. Should say that they're referencing page 15-8 in our ordinance.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
And then the other question I asked Colin was about the 100-foot setback, which I'm still talking to him a bit more about that. But I've also looked at the applications again, and they always did reference the wetlands in the back. And looking at the shoreland map, that unfortunately has a letter covering the area we're talking about in particular. The wetlands likely are something that you do have to measure 100 feet from. But that's what I'm assuming now, and that's what I have to still follow through with and clear up with the DEP.
100 feet from the actual edge, I mean, where do you measure that? Can the wetlands change over time or with floods,
It's-
or how does that,
So,
what are the metrics as
So-
far as that?
so when the town updates its comprehensive plan,
Yeah.
which is done every 10 or so years,
Right,
we get maps from beginning with habitat,
right,
and those outline sensitive wetlands or other endangered habitats.
sure.
And what towns can do, and this is what Waldeboro did, was they decided that these wetlands are so sensitive that they are in the resource protection zone. So you have to be
Precise.
right.
Yeah.
Can I jump in there for a second?
Sure.
In the email, he was talking about a 250-foot setback from the resource protection zone.
Right. So,
If that was the case, doesn't that sort of eliminate his proposed location as a possibility?
So, in a resource protection zone, if you're building a single-family house, you have to follow through a special exemption, and that's what we were doing at the beginning of their application last meeting. Because if the planning board believes that all the boxes are ticked there, then he is allowed to be less than 250 feet, but he still has to be at least 100 feet away. 250 feet is just the standard shoreland zone, except for stream protections.
Got it. I was having a hard time understanding what he was saying. And in the site plan that he had provided, I noted during that meeting that he did not dimension his location from that wetland line, right? That was part of why we tabled this.
Yes. Yes. And that's one of the things that I'm also clearing up with Colin as well.
Okay.
Because I was confused when I was hearing the comments about the previous people not being 100 feet away, which I didn't think made sense. But then looking back at the applications, it showed that those were variance requests from the wetlands as well.
Right.
So that's why there was this huge issue with it.
And I believe he brought that up in the meeting, that the previous applicants were looking for a variance because of the size of the building they wanted to build, which would have encroached into that 100-foot setback.
So the variance requests were because, well, somewhat, yes, the variance requests were so that they could build within 100 feet from either the high water line or the wetlands, which is difficult to do since those are state mandated setbacks.
Correct.
So that's pretty much it for that. So that's all I really had for correspondence with that
So are
application.
you expecting he won't be back?
I'm expecting to continue talking with Colin because I'm curious where this does leave the application. And it's something that, unless you want me to now get the town attorney involved to ask about developed sites, my steps are really with the DEP pretty much.
So he could still continue to utilize the site as a tent platform type of arrangement, right?
That's something I need to talk to the DEP about.
I would strongly, speaking for myself, like to have a sit-down with the attorney, because, I mean, site improvement, development, those are not precise words. In the MAA, in their seminar, they say words should
specific.
be precise. There should be no ambivalence or very little. So something like that, I would feel out of my
Comfortable.
league, so to speak, to say I'm gonna vote this way when I don't really have the background to fully understand it.
I don't know if, Mark?
Well, I'm sorry, I'm just wondering if it would be premature. This thing, depending on what DEP says, could squash the whole thing, and it's gonna be a moot point at that stage.
So I can do that where I talk with DEP first.
Right, if
'Cause-
we find out DEP doesn't have an issue, then maybe we go that next route and contact, the attorney.
Okay. So that's it on 370 Hendrickson Lane, unless there are any other questions or comments.
I've got something else on this one.
Sure.
In the correspondence from MMA on this, they, I think, correctly went through and determined that the site is in fact developed per our definition in the land use ordinance. While we might be able to put this particular application to bed, I'm not sure that the definition on this makes sense. And obviously, we're far too late to go amending this
Right.
particular thing. But I think that it's something that we ought to talk about, because I find it very strange that the development that he has done to date prohibits him from removing that development and replacing it with something else in the future. The way that the text reads, as soon as he put a stick of lumber down there on that site, he could no longer do anything else to the site. And I understand the intent. It's a resource protection area. If it's developed, it's developed. You don't want to keep, you don't want to let somebody build a house and then build a bunch of additions onto it. It seems a little unreasonable to me that this person has bought this piece of land and put some temporary tent platforms on it, and this is precluding him from ever developing it again. And that's the way that I read the definition of developed in our, I don't have the paragraph in front of me,
Right.
but it just seems like, that ought to be tweaked somehow so that it makes sense. And it could be, this is just a weird one-off thing that we're never going to see again, but
Yeah.
it's a little odd.
Well, and this might be something we discuss a little bit later on. The reason it had to go through this special exemption checklist or section 11.7.8 in the ordinance is because that was particularly something for 1 and 2 family residential homes I think that's only applicable to someone who wants to build a single or 2-family home in a resource protection zone. So in our ordinance in the table on page 6-16, in the resource protection, it requires planning board approval, but it has a footnote number 9, and that's, again, this is pretty much what the main DEP has statewide as a minimum. And that is single-family residential structures may be allowed by special exception only according to the provisions of 11.7.8, which is what we were going through. So it might be a rare instance that ever happens, but I think it's supposed to make it so someone's not developing it and then they're trying to develop it even more to a single-family home, I think. But
Right.
that might be, but you're right, that might be something that's just worth more discussion later on. Does that answer the question, or?
I think that we understand it the same way. I could definitely see this being a sort of an odd conflict that we can't really resolve without changing the language in the ordinance. I think we probably are all on the same page that, this is unlikely to meet the standard to allow the special exception. But if it does, I think, still can't approve it because the lot has already been developed, right?
As the MMA legal counsel and Colin Clark from DEP said, they've given their perception on it. It's a matter if you want to accept that as well or other details for this. It's still up to the planning board on how you want to determine that.
Would you
And-
refresh me, Max, on what did they actually say? Did they say it was developed because you put a tent stand up?
What Colin Clark did was and MMA did was they referenced our definitions.
Right.
Yeah, and if, Johnny, if you read that definition,
Yeah.
what he has done there to date definitely meets our definition of developed. It's an extremely strict definition. There's only a couple of things that you can do that are any sort of construction, temporary or permanent, on a site that doesn't meet the definition of development. And it's like putting in a temporary power pole and putting in a driveway to the site and stuff like that. To me, it's open and shut that it meets that definition.
Well, it even says for improved or entities to improve or unimproved real estate. So if you, take the pole down, or take the road out, or take the shed down, do anything.
It's
Both directions.
it's all up to local interpretation for those items, and I think, Brendan, you raised this point earlier. The intent was it's the resource protection zone, and I think the DEP just wanted to nip it in the bud for some cases.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So this is the definition of development only in the resource protection zone.
That's develop, no, those are definitions for the entire town.
Everything.
Yeah. But obviously, it doesn't mean that if you build a campsite in the rural district, you can't build a house there. It's,
Right.
the restriction we're talking about is only in the resource protection. So, are there any other comments or questions from the planning board for 370 Hendrickson Lane? I did see a hand raised in the audience. I don't know if you,
Yeah,
do you mind just stating your name for the?
Cheryl Doyle.
Cheryl.
I live at 1313 Fintown, so we're sort of abutters, not quite. My question was, it's the 100-foot setback.
Mhm.
So if he can't legally, there's no place on his plot that comes within 250, then he's allowed to go to the 100-foot setback if certain things are met, is that right?
So, the shoreline zone is 250 feet for all districts.
Yes.
And that's where you start going through those tighter restrictions. For building a single-family home, you have to prove it's the greatest practical extent away from, you have to meet at least 100 feet, and then you have to be as far back as you can.
Right, so it's gotta be at least 100 feet,
Yes.
but then anything beyond
That-
that,
that's-
if there's anywhere that he can build.
That's every shoreline district except, I think, general development.
I think his problem is he's got the lake and he's got the wetlands behind.
Yeah.
So it's really.
But, I mean, if you look at I looked at his site map.
Yeah.
And his edge, one edge is 150 feet, and right next to it, he's got two little 100-foot setbacks, which should have been 2/3 of that side, and they're less than 1/3 of that side. So there's no way that that's 100 feet on the map. So I assume he was going to make a better map.
Yeah.
And hopefully somebody was going to, because the maps that he had taken the town map and superimposed the FEMA map
Mhm.
to it, and I wondered who did that for him, how accurate that was.
I think he did it himself. Yeah.
We might have to ask him to get a professional map made
Surveyor.
in this situation.
Right.
If he wants to pursue it, because we're all kind of guessing here.
Well, and that was something that was raised, that the maps needed to be a lot clearer.
Yeah.
So, does that answer your question?
Yes, I think so.
Are there any other questions or comments for 370 Hendrickson Lane? Or at least just the correspondence?
Will we be notified if he does?
Notifications do get sent out to neighbors, and
And we're neighbors.
yes.
The last time we got it 2 days before your meeting, so. that was-
I always try and send them out at least not the most recent Monday, but the Monday before. So for this meeting, I would have sent out letters on what was 2 Mondays ago. It was-
Okay, so it should be a 2-week thing. I don't know why ours didn't show up until 2 days before the meeting last.
Do you? Sometimes it's how the mail is delivered. Like apparently, if it's mail that's not going directly into Waldeboro, it has to go to, I think it's Skowhegan, and then they process it there, and then. Yeah, no, it's frustrating. Our secretary lives in Friendship, so if I want to get something to her, I either drive it down myself or it has to go to Skowhegan and then back to her.
Smokes.
Efficiency.
Is it possible to get like email notices or?
If you do send me a request, I could do that.
Thank you, okay.
And there is also an ad that's always posted in Lincoln County News the week before our meeting that specifically says what's going to be on the agenda. And you can always call my office as well and ask, is this going to be on the agenda tonight?
Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Max, I had one quick thing.
Yep.
It was pointed out in item 2 on that email from MMA or actually I think you pointed this out in your question, was that the only variances that the board is allowed to give are on dimensions?
Yeah, I was going to go through the rest of the correspondence. I just wanted to do 370
Okay.
Hendrickson Lane first. And if you all want to stay and listen to the rest of it, you're more than welcome. But I think we're done on 370
So
Hendrickson
you're
Lane.
done completely with that site?
Yep.
Okay.
It's gonna be really
Thank you.
interesting.
Thank you, yeah.
Have a nice
It was
night.
the last 2 times too.
My point on that one real quickly was just that, when VOA came in, they were asking for a variance on the number of parking spaces that were gonna get provided. And if we can only do dimensional variances, we're not gonna be able to offer that stuff.
So the variance item was more about, so variance and waiver keeps getting thrown back and forth. A waiver is something you're allowed to do for a standard requirement, which is parking, which is buffers, or even historic village district items. A variance has to only be given for dimensional standards. So I think what was raised was the maximum lot coverage that you brought up. They have to do 50%. If they want to, if they can't do that 50% lot coverage, they would have to go to the Board of Appeals for a variance. They can't ask you for a variance. I don't know if that answered your question or I made the waters even more muddy.
I was specifically thinking about the request to offer less than 1 parking space per unit.
So that is something you can waive. I don't think it would go over well though.
Possibly, yeah. Okay.
Less than 1, I thought you had at least 1 per unit.
Yeah, it keeps going back and forth because the way I read their narrative, I think it was either I read their narrative and they said we're going to provide 1 parking space per person and the map showed 32 spots, or they said they were going to provide 32 spots but only have 1 spot but the map shows 1 spot per person. It was a bit of it was a pre-application, but it was pretty inconsistent for that. But no.
Yeah, they also listed 3 different totals for the number of units that were going to be provided in the building throughout the various documents. So it was a little bit unclear. But there was a whole conversation about, in their experience, when they provide 1 space per unit, they don't get used, and it's not really necessary. It's senior housing, not everybody's driving. It does sort of make sense.
Right.
But yeah, I didn't really understand the difference between the waiver and the variance, so that's a useful distinction for me.
Yeah, the waiver is something you can do for anything in Articles 3, 7, 8, 9, and 10, but a variance we specifically have outlined in, I think, Article 5 of our ordinance, and that specifically goes over what variances are allowed, and those are only permitted by the Board of Appeals. And that's mostly dimensional standard items.
Okay.
All right, so I'll quickly go. Are there any other questions for variance versus waiver, or?
And do you go by on the variance, do you go by the MMAs? Because they have a whole list.
Yes.
So that's,
Yes.
you're following that?
It's exactly that.
Okay.
Let me see. Right, because the variance question came up for the bed and breakfast, where they were asking if the board could give a variance or a waiver because our definition says 5 rooms only, and MMA said, your definition says 5, you need to do that. So it is part of the recommended land use ordinance revisions to change that to 8, so that's hopefully going to clear itself up depending on our discussion later tonight. And the last item, there's 2 items, but the last one was more of something that Julie asked me about when we were doing the ordinance revisions but I'll get to that later if you're interested. So the 4th item that I asked was about the historic village standards, because there seemed to be some back and forth on how much discretion the planning board has versus what is expected. So because it's so broad, you do get a bigger say on what is considered historic. So it's up to the planning board to decide how you're satisfied for it. So
The broader it is, the more we have to say?
the broader it is, the more power you have. So I think one of the things that was brought up was like the type of brick that could be used. You could make a specific condition of approval that says well, you're approved, but you have to use these types of brick, or you have to make sure it's these types of brick or similar, something
See,
like
I
that.
don't think we're, until we spend good, shooting from the hip
Yep.
doesn't make sense. This is the first project that's coming through at this point of time in the historic village.
Mhm.
To pull it together, it's reasonable, it's something that we wanna live with for a decade. Takes some time, and I'm not sure we're ready to.
Well, this was just,
I mean, I don't care if it's bricks or not, I mean, I assume that the larger bricks are more expensive to build with, but.
well, this is more about preparing you when that application or another historic village happens, because there was some argument that the planning board just has to allow it because someone else is saying it. But no, it's the opposite. If you don't think the building looks historic, you're or if you want to get the opinion of someone else to weigh in on it, that's all within your power to do so. And you can make conditions saying, well, it looks historic, but you're promising this, so we'll prove it, but you better have this. Like the Waldoboro High School sign that they're saying, you can make a specific condition saying, well, it's approved, but you're making the Waldoboro High School sign using this material and that material or so and so. And obviously it has to have some reason behind it. You can't just say, well, I want a gold-plated high school that's being built out of this. It doesn't make sense.
And the undue hardship variance, again, it's so open to interpretation. Number 3 is granting variance won't alter essential character of locally, so.
Well, don't worry, that's a Board of Appeals item.
Well, right, but I'm just saying, again, it's just in the eye of the beholder. What I
Right.
think is historic or this, it's just so, I don't know how you can put a finer point on it, but you're just gonna get into all of these little rabbit holes.
That,
If there's not a more concise, I mean, they have hardship is not result of action by applicant or prior owner.
Right.
Land in question cannot yield reasonable return without a variance, so you can
Right.
go on infinitum, ad infinitum.
Do we have any idea when they're gonna come back through again?
they're going to go to the select board on Tuesday to provide a general update. I don't know what that entails.
Will they provide drawings at that time?
I'm not too
Or
sure.
site plan?
I think
Or
what
the same one?
I think what they're going to do is come to the select board, just give a general oversight or overview, say what their progress is, and they might say we're going to think of doing these forums this day or that day. I'm not too sure. I just know it's a general update next Tuesday.
I don't know what you think about this, Brendan, but I was kind of thinking that even if we took what you wrote up, and I kind of contributed part of it too, if we simplify, what they presented the first draft, and simplified it to the point we're saying we're concerned that there's not enough detail around the window, just kind of general, not enough around the windows, enough variation in texture, corners, the roof, just that kind of thing, just so it looks like we're doing, some due diligence, and when we actually looked at the drawings.
Sure,
Without
yeah,
being
that
very
makes sense to
specific.
me.
And that way, maybe they come back with a couple of things next time,
Sure. At the meeting last time, whenever VOA was there, there's a couple of well, there's a lot of different perspectives. There's a couple of interesting points brought up. Barbara, you said the architects know what they're doing, just let them do your job. And Mark said if the people in the neighborhood are happy with it, then I'm gonna be happy with it. I'm paraphrasing, obviously.
Right.
I think that both of those things are probably true. I think it makes sense. Like if the community's happy with how it looks on paper in the presentations, then we've probably done our duty to make sure that the intent of the ordinance is being met. One thing that I would suggest doing is putting a condition on the approval that no substantial changes to the design of the exterior of the building be made without planning board approval.
Right.
Because if they go in and get an approval, then they start value engineering it after the fact, when they start hiring contractors and start taking out expensive details, we could approve it and not get the building that we think we're approving.
And that's a condition that is within your jurisdiction.
Okay, great. I was concerned that it was not.
No, it's a good idea. That would be very wise.
What the heck? Huh. There was a weird glitch going on the TV screen.
I
It's
know.
been doing it all through the meeting, yeah.
You're vibrating.
Sorry.
I think that's it for those all the correspondence items. The fifth one was something Julie wanted us to look into about perhaps including an escrow account requirement for applications, but that was something MMA said would have to be done outside what we're doing right now. So I don't know if we're going to go through that. So that's all. Oh, actually, the last site plan update is for the gravel pits. So I sent some documents out, I think a month ago, and I didn't hear anything back from people, so it might have just been lost in the emails. But Darrell Flagg did provide some updated items, including the certification of the geologist who will be working on this, an updated site map that shows where the stormwater is going to go.
I didn't get that. Did you get that?
It might have
About
just.
the Tidewater.
It might have. Well, I have some physical stuff. You can take a look at it afterwards. The site map shows where the stormwater is projected to go, and outlines the silt foam fence that's going to be going around the existing gravel pits, so that it creates the infiltration system that they were talking about during the meeting. There's also the signature from Knox. Who is it?
Yeah.
Mary Thompson from Knox County Soils, and excerpts from Chapter 500 from Maine DEP, going over the infiltration system as a viable option for the system that's being proposed. And Stan looked at the documents, he thinks it's fine, and that's about it for it.
Sorry for not responding to that.
It's all right.
I didn't see that you put an attachment on that. I read the email about Sarah resigning.
Oh.
And apparently didn't make it to the bottom of it.
Oh.
I really wish that these people would comply with the requirement, which is to submit a plan that meets the standards of the DEP.
That's where it's a bit confusing, because they're showing this is what DEP is saying. This is exactly
No.
what, you know.
I've done this a bunch of times. I've written these plans. The DEP website could not be more helpful explaining what you're supposed to provide in an erosion and sedimentation control plan. I get that these guys don't know how to do it, but there's the basics of this are not being met. I'll write you a response and explain what ought to be done there.
It's
So the engineer guy, or whoever that was that came in, he submitted a new plan?
I can show you the map, but the map that was provided, and it wasn't in the email attachment, unfortunately, because I didn't have anything to scan it, but they provided an updated site map for signatures and everything, and it does show this is the gravel pit that's going to be built, this is the projection for where the stormwater is going to go, and it's going to be into the bottom of the existing pit, and that's the infiltration system. And the geologist who's provided his certification would argue this is what's required. This is what he's done for the other gravel pits. And I think we can talk about it more after the meeting, I suppose. But the board has approved it with the condition. That's the thing. And Stan's looked at it, and he's signing up. He can't sign off on it, but he's heard the conditions from the planning board that he has to now review it and say it, and he's reviewed it, and he's satisfied with it. And Brendan, for just so you're aware, for the documents, it's to acknowledge that the vote happened, and I'm going to include in the findings the fact that your stated reasons for voting against and all these other items that you will probably discuss with me after the meeting.
Okay.
So it's a done deal.
Well, we'll look at it after the meeting,
As
because
far as I'm concerned.
Well, it was approved based on the conditions, and you're saying you don't think one of the things that was submitted is proper.
Correct.
Is what you're saying?
Well, we've got, correct me if I'm wrong, we've got information from DEP that says that it meets the standard. So then why are we even going down that road? If DEP says it's okay, then it's okay. You know, regardless of what you may know is the law, they're the ones that write the law. So if they're saying it's okay,
it's something that I feel we're going to keep going back and forth on, because this was the same argument back in January as well.
I understand. But again, we're not ones that are interpreting DEP law. It's DEP that's giving us the information, and that's all we have to go by.
Mark, why are you saying that? What is this DEP statement that you're referring to?
It's what you keep referring to as far as what we have to go by with, you know, the information, but isn't it DEP that
I talked with DEP back in January 12th, and they said that infiltration systems like what Darrell Flag is doing is always acceptable, and
correct, and that's what I'm getting at, is he has an infiltration system, but you're saying that's not enough. That's unacceptable.
That's not at all what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that he's required to submit an erosion and sedimentation control plan. The plan is the problem. He's not submitting a plan that meets the DEP standards.
okay.
I believe
Everything that
that,
he's doing is acceptable, but what he's not doing is submitting a plan that explains where his BMPs are going, how he's going to maintain them, when they're going to be inspected.
I'll clear that up with the
A
geologist.
tool that he should be using
Uh,
to do his work.
I will,
And he's
I'll-
not creating that, and so I can't sign off on this until he does it.
I will clear that up with the geologist after this meeting then.
Yeah, the geologist was clearly unaware of what the requirement was, had no
I
idea what an
would-
erosion
I-
control plan was.
I
He
I-
was going into a high
I probably, yeah,
lack of
Brandon,
bandwidth.
yeah,
complicated.
I
It's
would,
just not
I would probably hold back from making statements like that in these types of meetings. I'm just gonna say that. I will talk with them after the meeting, and that can probably be the, hopefully, end of that discussion.
yeah, Brendan, the connection's terrible.
Oh, jeez.
We're
Hold on.
blanking out, so
Oh my God.
there's no point. Wow. Alien invasion.
Good thing I don't have a seizure issue.
I have no idea what's going on. Supposedly the same thing happened with the select board yesterday. I don't know what's going on with that. So, up to-
Seems better now.
it's better now?
Yeah.
It's something with the HDMI connection, I don't know. So I'll talk with the geologist following the meeting.
Okay,
Okay. So, moving on to land use ordinance amendments, or no, LD 2003, I'm sorry. So, the state is fun with this because a lot of the changes that we're going to be talking about tonight are because of the state statute LD 2003, which is increasing the number of required homes that can be built and accessory dwelling units, definition changes, everything of the sort. What's great timing is that the state is potentially going to delay the implementation date of July 1st. There's two different pieces of legislation in the works that right now that would impact that deadline. Unfortunately, they're only in committee right now, so they might approve it or pass those laws after we have put this on the warrant.
what might it do?
So the
Make it simpler, make it more complicated, what might it do?
what the state might do is just delay the implementation date. They might delay it by 2 years, or they might give towns an extra 3 or 4 months, but only towns of 10,000 or more, which would exclude Waldoboro. So
Should we put some of this stuff in November?
that's the hard thing that the state's doing to us right now, because on one hand, we could say, let's not do any of the LD 2003 related changes. Well, they might not do these amendments that they're talking about right now and then July 1st comes around, and
We're out of compliance.
we're not in compliance anymore. But on the other hand, we might get these amendments passed, and then the state turns around at the 11th hour and says, nope, you're not required to have these at all, and now we have them even though we're not required to.
But none of these are, you know, horrendous, right? They're not a hardship.
Not too much. I think what I'm going to suggest is, as we're going through the land use ordinance amendments, I'm going to make a suggestion to have two main amendments to give to the select board. One is a housekeeping item, one is an LD 2003 item.
Is that what the two colors are about?
No, the blue are just the changes from the changes last time. I'll go over that a bit.
So am I being thick here, but how do we know, have we seen it broken out to date?
No, because they didn't tell me about this until I sent everything out.
And actually,
It's
if you-
the state.
If you look at it, the town looks like, the land use ordinance, the town, I mean, there's some strict requirements here that they're sending down. Have you looked actually at it?
LD 2003?
Yes.
They're,
Section 4 allows for additional density for affordable housing developments.
I held a workshop on this.
Right, and I mean, I was up there when they were talking about this, but there's so many things I think that are going to,
No, and the state DCD finally gave me their rulemaking, I
Right.
think, 2 weeks ago, and that's what I was able to incorporate into our current ordinance
Right.
based on what the state has provided me.
so the state obviously overrules the town with this.
Yes.
So anything that is on here has got to be changed if it's not already in there.
Yes.
Is that what you're, okay.
Yeah. And we have some abilities to change things, but we'll get into that later.
Okay.
So that's the update I wanted to give on LD 2003. What I'll do is, when we're going through the land use ordinance amendments, I will say what is an LD 2003 change and what is a housekeeping change. And by the end of it, if it's all set and done, the board can say, we would like to have the housekeeping items go to the select board, we would like the LD 2003 items to go to select board, or we can delay it for another month and see what happens.
If this is coming down in the summer, I think to Barbara's point, well, should we just wait and see? I mean, when does it become, is this a law?
July 1st is when
Yeah,
so it's already passed,
okay.
and they have given towns until July 1st of this year to implement those changes, or we have to follow those changes.
I follow you. Right, be approved after June 30th, so anytime after that. So this is a law. This is a state of Maine law.
And they didn't give us grant funding until, well, there is no grant right now. They're talking about rules for it. And they have given us they sent the rules out, what
Right.
they want us to have our ordinances to say. They gave us this language 2 weeks ago, despite the fact that we now have 4 months left to implement these changes.
It's gonna be a huge undertaking, I think. I mean, are you familiar with base density that is otherwise allowed? I mean, that
Everything.
seems to me like it's,
I'm aware of all of that.
right.
And,
Are you understanding it? I know,
Yep.
with all due respect?
yep, I understand it all. I like some of the stuff. I don't want people to get me wrong. There's some things I do like about the legislation,
Right,
but the timing is terrible. It's
Right.
just terrible.
terrible.
Can I ask a dumb question? So this is to promote
Housing,
housing, densifying housing,
right,
mother-in-law apartments or additional
Right.
second units on properties.
Yep.
We have currently in our ordinance, I believe, trailers can only go in certain areas. We've got trailer parks and then we have
right,
a zone where trailers can be.
right.
And then there's double wides, which are different, right? So is there anything about material, I mean, are we making any kind of distinction like that? These can be
No.
instant houses that show up behind?
Instant houses. These could be tiny homes, they could be mobile homes, they could be the mega mansion, mini mansion, whatever they call it.
But limited to square footage.
Limited, they still have to meet our dimensional standards.
Yeah.
And this is
Well,
for
but
anything,
don't we have a 750 or 800 square foot, wasn't this part of the LD?
right, and I'll get into that. That's for accessory dwellings that you're probably talking about.
Yeah.
In Excuse me, Barbara, could you move your microphone closer or point it at you better?
Pretty sure it can.
Very well. Thank you.
Hello, Susan.
Hello, thank you.
So, I'll go through the articles. I'll go through it article by article, so we're not jumping around from different things. And hopefully we will address this all tonight so that we can get something to the select board for June. So, I'll start with, and by the way, Susan has given me her notes for grammatical and technical changes. I assume we're fine. In the past, we've just accepted those because it's our secretary giving us grammar changes. I assume there's no need to go over all that.
Nope, great catches, as usual.
So, first is the administration article, Article 2, and on page 2-2.
I actually got an extra copy of that. I didn't get it.
Sure.
I did not get it.
I didn't realize the number of planning board members had to be in our ordinance. I didn't realize that was a,
Some towns have bylaws and some use the ordinance. But yeah. So 2.2.1.2, this is a change that would have the planning board consist of 5 voting members and no restriction on the number of alternative voting members. Now, this was a last-minute change that is complemented by section 2.2.2.4, which changes the size of a quorum to 3 members. The main reason I'm suggesting this change is because by June, we're going to be down to 4 members on the, well, I think 4 members, or 5, because unfortunately Sarah has resigned. She just does not have, there's complications, so she can't go any further, so I don't have to go any further on that. When we did have a full 7-member board, Jim unfortunately resigned as well, and so that brought us down to 5 members. And I was informed by Julie that Mark unfortunately will not be on the planning board next term because he will be taking over code enforcement responsibility. Well, I don't know if it's taking over, but you'll be
Eventually it will
you'll be
be.
working in the code enforcement department, so
Correct.
you shouldn't be on the planning board since there's going to be that
There'll be a
conflict.
conflict.
With
so-
Stan?
Yes.
Okay.
So that will then bring our numbers down to 4, which means if we have to stick with our current ordinance, we would need all 4, Brendan, Barbara, Johnny, and Jeff, to be at every single meeting unless we've magically just got 3 new members. So I'm suggesting reducing it to 5 so we have a little more flexibility, and with the quorum being 3. And the no limits on alternative members means that even if we have 5 people, people could still join the planning board and they would just be an alternate member that can be called on if someone's sick.
wait, so they wouldn't come to a meeting and vote if we have
They
5 or 6 members?
They can if they are interested. They can if they're interested, but the chair would usually just call to them and say, this person has said they're sick, we need you to step up.
But they wouldn't be only if they were guest people they'd be voting. I'm just wondering, did we have this before in our?
Not alternative voting members, it was just, we just said 7 planning board members, that was it.
If we can't get 7 regular members, what makes us think that we can get 5 and 2 alternates?
I'm not giving a limit on alternates, I'm just saying, if we had alternates in the future, that'd be great, I don't want to turn them away.
Maybe if you had candy every time, we'd get more.
Maybe. So,
I think that's very reasonable, 3, because I've been on it for 5 years now, and it's always like, is this person gonna show up, are we gonna have a
Right.
quorum? It's just stressful, because then you might not be feeling well, and then you feel like you gotta come in.
yeah.
So I would definitely give my vote for the 5.
Okay. Are there any other suggestions or changes to these items?
I think
And this
it's
is a
reasonable. I don't have any problems with it.
And this is a housekeeping item.
Yeah, I definitely.
I don't see what other choice we've got.
All right. So if there are no other comments on that, move to Article 3. So, just going through these items, they're ones we've discussed before. 3.2.1 and 3.2.2 will change the number of days for reviewing an application to 14 days. Just keep that consistent across the board. And then for 3.2.2, it's updating the town planner code enforcement officer review so that we are required to send out notices to the planning board, the emergency services, and abutters in the event we do get an application that we determine is complete. And then we give everyone a 2-week opportunity to request a public hearing. And if there is no public hearing that is requested by any of those members, then Stan and I or the code enforcement officer and the planning director of planning are given the authority to approve the application as is, or with conditions that we see fit. And I'm gonna just start going through these sections. If no one says anything, I'm just assuming that we're good to go, and I'm moving on. The next one is section 3.2.3, and this is on page 3-3. It is just I'm sorry, 3.3.5, that's on page 3-3.
You got lost for a second.
Yeah, I know. I'm double-sided, that's the problem. This is just adding a sentence to the end, noting that a municipal approval does not exempt an applicant from receiving approval from other regulatory bodies as well as from private agreements, because we've just had people argue in the past, oh, I got the planning board approval, so I don't need to do anything anymore. It's like, nope, go get your other approval. 3.4, public hearing requirements. This includes a new item so that people who are on private roads are all given the notice rather than just the abutters. We had this because of the solar farm on Controversy Lane, where some people felt like everyone should have received the notice, and it does make sense. It's a private road. They all have responsibility for maintenance. And it either goes to the road association or it just goes to every individual if there is no road association. And those are all the changes for Article 3. Those are all housekeeping items. So next is Article 6. So I'll start with 6.7.4, change of use. So this is so that whenever there is a planning board related, what is it? I'm sorry, let me read this. If there is a use that requires planning board approval in the matrix, that's not the shoreline zone, if there is a planning board use in that matrix that is just changing the use of the building, it's not going to build out anything, there's no exterior development, then it would automatically just go through the CP approval instead of the planning board approval. But it has to be something that's still permitted in that district. So someone who wants to do a group family home in the village district would not be allowed to do so because that's not permitted in the village district. And that's,
So,
yeah.
an example of that would be CDK cabinet makers, right, in the village. They wound up coming to the planning board for a change of use.
Correct. Them, as well as the Cornhole Connection that's across the street from us, both of them had to come to the planning board because that was a planning board required item. We sent out the notices, we put the ad in the paper, and there were no comments. There was no request. None of the neighbors showed up, and there was no issue. Under the CP approval, the code enforcement officer and the planner would still send out the notice. We would still send out to the butters as well as to the planning board members. And if anyone had, like, let's use CDK cabinet makers, if there was a planning board member that said, well, I'm concerned about the noise, then we could still do the planning board meeting as long as we're notified on it.
To be clear on that, Max, isn't it anybody that gets notified can call for the meeting, including like abutters and
Right.
anybody else? Right.
Anyone can request it. You could be having a lovely chat with someone who lives on the other side of town, and they could say, I want to have the public hearing, and we'll shrug and say, okay, but we did say all residents.
I still think that anything that involves more traffic to a property should come from planning board.
The uses are all, well, the ones that do have CP are all gray area items. Like it's hard to say what is going to cause so much traffic, like office buildings, for example. If someone's going to build a 3-story office building, that's going to cause a lot more traffic. But I remember my first site plan here was Cornerstone Insurance at the top of the hill, and I remember being asked, why are we reviewing this?
Yeah, no, that was me. But yeah, because it went from a restaurant, which seemed to me a lot of coming and going,
Right.
to a small insurance office or
Right.
whatever it is. Although they have a huge parking lot now. So it seemed like it was decreasing in use and traffic.
Right.
So that was, but if it went in the reverse, if that building became a restaurant, I think it should automatically change, that type of change in use should come from the planning board, but.
Well, and that would be something.
That's not what this says, right?
Well, the emergency services would be notified as well, and they can request a public hearing. So another example, well, somewhat an example, would be what is it? Moody Seafood, that was just down here. If Stan and I were just given the application, we notified the emergency services. The emergency services said, we want to be sure that there's a public hearing. That was when it was still a planning board required item. So that would have been something that goes to the planning board anyways. Same thing with neighbors. If neighbors are concerned about traffic, even if it doesn't seem like there's going to be a huge impact, it's just going to come to the planning board.
What happens if, for instance, I remember we approved Delano's, they wanted to increase their thing, that little,
Right.
was that different because it's their own property, or did they?
They would still have to come to the planning
they would-
board.
Even though it's all in their purview?
So this item that I'm talking about is if they're doing no exterior parking, but no other exterior changes.
I see.
Although it could be paired with the minor additions, but that's
Right,
a certain size.
okay.
So that's the first item in the whole section. And then going through the matrix, there was a request to have bed and breakfast require planning board approval throughout all the districts, except industrial, because I don't
It's
think.
not allowed, yeah.
I don't know. Do you want to have a bed and breakfast in the industrial park?
I don't think it's allowed, is it?
It's not allowed,
So,
much to George's disapproval.
I know you explained that, Max, but the town has nothing about Airbnbs.
No.
So what does that mean? It's just the Wild West here? Anybody can?
oh, boy. That's a hot topic.
I mean,
right
I don't know, I don't know, I asked that before and nobody ever.
I believe when we were talking about it on the land use committee, I
Yeah.
was told, but it's not a good topic to talk about.
Is that because there's some controversy over it, or?
There's a lot of
legally,
there is a
or-
lot of controversy in a lot of towns.
Well, I don't think the town should shirk from that responsibility. I think they should
Well, the
welcome it.
state doesn't have it, I mean, Portland has something now,
Oh,
right?
well,
Yeah,
yes.
some towns-
And
yeah.
Several towns do.
Some towns do. Some towns don't want to touch it. When I'm
Me-
talking about LD 2003 with a lot of towns,
Yeah.
I say you are allowed to do short-term rentals because that's allowed in this thing, and they say no. We don't want to do
Well,
anything.
2003, it's the whole emphasis is to allow more people to be able to live.
Right.
Again, whatever, so that would,
And
I guess in Portland, because that's where my,
I do have something to hopefully address that a little bit
Sure.
later on capping short-term rentals, but that's a little bit later
okay,
on.
no, I just was curious because it's,
There is a registration form that Stan does, or the code enforcement officer does have for
Yeah.
rentals in general, so
okay.
it's not completely out of control, but
I wonder
it's not on the
when
matrix.
Every 2003
I didn't know
comes
that.
down.
it's a recent thing.
Okay. Well, keep me-
How does that work exactly, Max? Is there a requirement in the land use ordinance for someone to register?
I'd have to talk with Stan a bit more about that. Because He has something, and to be honest, I wasn't really involved in that whole registration thing, so
Okay.
I was focused on other things, like the medical marijuana ordinance.
So are we concerned that this LD,
We-
whatever this thing is gonna create all these accessory units for people to use as Airbnbs?
And again, I do have something that addresses that hopefully a little later on.
Okay.
I do want to try and go through it article by article.
Unintended
so many of them.
consequences.
If you,
Oh, I know
if
there are.
we want to include a short-term rental line item in the uses, we can, but it's,
I think at some time it would be appropriate. I mean,
I agree, I think it needs to be addressed in that. I think it's more prudent for us to get through this and then at a later date,
yeah.
consider what,
There's also.
because there's some other moving parts that are
Yeah,
going
like
to.
safety.
Get in front.
Well,
of
there
it.
is, and that's part of the registration process is, you know, and I'm being hypothetical, but do you wanna make it so that, you know, it's visited by code enforcement to make sure that they're meeting the standards for fire protection, you know? I mean, there's a bunch of different stuff that,
Yeah.
but there's a
So-
lot of moving parts to that.
so that can still be added in before it goes to the select board, just so everyone's aware.
Yeah.
Or it could be in November.
Or it could be November,
Yeah.
either option. But I'll finish Article 6 and then we can move on.
Okay.
So, the next change was breweries, distilleries, and vineyards/wineries on page 6-8. In my notes, there was a request to have planning board approval in the historic village. I feel that was because we were talking about the wine bar, but I don't know why that particular thing is allowed, is something people want in the historic village. It was just in my notes. Do we?
Well, if it's in all the other districts, why not,
Yep.
I guess?
I mean, keep in mind, just because I do have the notes doesn't mean it's final. If someone wants to change something, feel free to speak up.
I mean, if we weren't gonna have it anywhere, it would be rural maybe, I don't know. I don't know, breweries, vineyards, it's all traffic, again, that's my concern,
Right.
so.
Sorry, Barbara.
Yep.
Max, what exactly is the change?
On page 6-8, the use breweries, distilleries, and vineyards/wineries. Previously, it was prohibited to have those in the historic village, but in my notes, it said someone wanted to have it allowed, but with planning board approval.
I see.
That's why we're all fine with it. I'm fine moving on. But
I mean, it's unlikely, right? But,
I'm not sure what the objection would be to
Okay.
locate.
all right. Just wanted to be sure. Wait, hold on. Are you asking about the? Oh, great. What is with this stupid thing? I might just have to disconnect the visual.
what's that wiggling on this, is that Max?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Max, you've been drinking too much coffee.
It froze up on me again.
I have no idea what's going on. I have no idea what's going on with that. Fortunately, we do have the backup recording, so I'm gonna just use that for later.
Internet connection is unstable.
I don't know. We might have to get someone in to check that. Yep.
It's very strange. I see like 4 pictures of myself across the top of the
Yeah.
screen.
So, how about now? Do we look, or not look, do we sound fine? Is there any freezing up issues?
He's froze now.
He's froze.
Oh, he's
I
back.
can hear you.
Oh, he's back.
Okay, well, I'm gonna have to go through this. People always mess with this room, and I guess they mess with my equipment. Okay. So if there's no changes to the breweries item, the next change was at the bottom of page 6-8. This was to include bars to cafes/delis. So now it says cafes/delis/bars. And I think this was just to clarify that a wine bar would be allowed, since it's not a restaurant, but it's a smaller use, similar to what this category is supposed to emphasize.
So if we're allowing a bar in the historic village, why are we not allowing a brewery?
We
And-
are.
Yeah, we are now.
It's
And
just going in front of the
Oh.
planning board.
right.
Gotcha, I misunderstood. Okay, so you are making the change there
Yeah.
on the brewery slide. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Next change is page 6-9, campground and tenting ground, aka small. So these are small scale ones. Rather than code enforcement officer and planner, it's required for planning board in rural, residential, and the Route 1A districts, which are the only districts it's allowed in.
Is that max small due to metrics of acreage or number of tents?
Both.
I believe it's 10 or less.
Well, yes.
10, okay. 10.
You can only have up to 10, so if you're in the residential area, you can have up to 10 campsites. And then once you say you want an 11th one, you can't if you're in the
You can't do it.
residential area.
Okay.
Can I go back a minute?
Sure.
Cafes, delis, bars, it's a very different lineup than a restaurant.
What?
Why? Why is it just CP for cafes, delis, and bars?
Oh, because the intent was that they're the smaller the secondary use. They're not really supposed to be the big, like they're not Applebee's, they're not McDonald's. They're like over on Cider Hill when there used to be Barstow, or I think it was Barstow, right? Like they were a retail operation, but they still sold some food. It's not really a sit-down restaurant. They would just have some deli sliced sandwiches or a little
But this
kitchen
is
hookup.
Say Worcester Inn, but say they were just gonna do a wine bar. They would just go,
If they're just a wine bar, then they would be a restaurant.
so it would just go CP, not go through planning board.
If it's a restaurant, it would be planning board. So if they,
I'm wondering why, you know, again, it's traffic and alerting neighbors. I mean, I know you've got this system, but I don't see people looking at these notices in time to raise the red flag that we want to have the public at a meeting.
we can change some of these to planning board, if you would like.
Doesn't it make sense to have it be the same?
Well,
It's a question of scale, but.
right.
But I don't really know. Cafe, I mean,
Well, I think the Cafe Perch, for example, that's opened in downtown, that was something that Stan and I approved. Because it was in the downtown, so we couldn't
has
say
a
anything.
history of having
Right.
food and bakery in there. Yeah.
Right. But we can change these to planning, we can change any of these to planning board.
Up to you guys. You know my opinion, but what do you think?
I don't care either way, whether it's, I think the biggest thing would be the breweries, because there's a lot more issues with that, so it definitely needs to be.
But like a cafe, I mean, suppose someone took over, I'm just making hypothetical, Topsail Farm, and they were just gonna have like a cafe there.
Well, if you're using,
That's a bad example.
yeah, I was gonna say, if you're gonna use Topsail Farm as an example, that wouldn't be allowed at all unless they did it in the rural part of their parcel. And that would have required planning board approval. Cider Hill, is that another, or how about,
Well, at a certain, I guess what I'm trying to say is at a certain point, especially in the summer months, if, you know, you can have a outdoor grill and be providing a lot of food to a lot of people.
okay. Well,
Um,
if the only use is serving food like that, it would be a restaurant. If this was,
So like the guy on Route 1 who's gonna do kind of, you know, these summer event kind of food things.
at the pawn shop, yeah,
No, not the pawn shop, the guy who's gonna have the campsites and the, up towards the vet.
yes,
Oh,
yeah. That was something that I raised at the planning board meeting, that the event center was something that the planning board was approving, but the cafe, but that secondary use is something that Stan and I was gonna, no, I'm sorry, it was the other way around. Stan and I approved the campsite item, but you were approving the events center, so that's not the cafe item, because he was catering.
But, you know, you could easily, like the barn's getting worked on or whatever, you could
Yeah.
easily have a cafe, but you could also have a lot of people there.
Yep.
and a lot of traffic, so.
He can change it to a cafe, and that would be something that Stan and I would review, or the code enforcement officer and planner would review, and notify the planning board with the changes that are being made. That highlighter was getting out of the way.
Okay, I
But-
just have my doubts that people are gonna, see these and raise their hand in time to have a public meeting on a lot of things that increase traffic
Traffic.
to sites. It's a little hypothetical.
I'm fine if we change it back. It really, it doesn't matter. If you think it, something like that is going to potentially increase traffic and be something that should be reviewed by us, I'm fine with changing that back. It doesn't matter to me. I don't know if anybody else has.
Well, if I may digress for just one moment, I think if we should get things in front of the planning board, because the overall, since I've been on here for 5 years, I don't know what the vision of the town is, but I think you should make the town more attractive and flesh these things out and attract more people. And instead of, certainly you gotta have guardrails, but I'm all for, bring it to us and see what their plan is, and you want the town to flourish. For instance, just an example of that bed and breakfast, I think that's wonderful. I think it's a
Right.
wonderful idea. And, people who may have a momentarily concern about the traffic, I understand that, I get that piece. But if they could understand the bigger picture down the road, they'd see that makes Waldeboro a much more attractive town. More people may come, house would go up, and so forth. So in the back of all of these things, I think, bring them to the planning board.
Because you think it might end up looking, a better looking project,
Yeah,
better
I mean,
presentation.
I think so. And that way you have your sensibilities are much more acute under what they want, and I'm not sure what everyone's vision for the town is, but mine has always been to grow it out with a good combination of making it an attractive, livable city.
So what change is being proposed?
Planning board
Planning board.
across,
Across?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll make that change.
Yep.
and as an example of that, I'm just gonna, the new clam selling place on Route 1, if it had just gone in front of those concrete things showed up anyway, but we have asked that the looks of it be improved, hopefully this spring. That's just an example.
Right. Okay.
We are talking about the cafe, deli, bar line item, right?
Yes.
On the matrix?
Yes. That's being changed to planning board across the board, so it'll be planning board except the residential and industrial, which are prohibited. So
Okay.
now, moving on, and I doubt there's any changes to the campground tenting one. We get to the scheduled dimensions, 6.8, found on page 6-18. This is reverting the rural and residential to their current requirements, and it's keeping Route 1 Commercial A, and it's getting the Route 1 Commercial A and industrial districts to be almost the same when it comes to the incentives on being on public water and sewer, with the difference being Route 1 Commercial A still will require a lot more road frontage, since it's meant to have a lot more road frontage, since it's going to be dealing with trucking terminals and everything.
Where is the road frontage on here? Why is it blank?
It's in 6.9.1.
No, 6.8 is the schedule of dimensions, and the top row, it's back to what it says. So what the ordinance currently has it at is, and I might just change it to try and make it look a bit more in sync. They had it done so that the top row would just be one number or none if it was consistent throughout that entire thing. And that's what the rural and residential would look like. And then you see on the far left corner, it goes public water and sewer, public sewer only, public water only, no public water or sewer, and that's where it changes the number based on what you have. So for road frontage, that's the third row.
So A would be 200 and industrial would be 125? Is that what you're saying?
For road frontage, if it's only on public water, Route 1 Commercial A would need 200 feet of road frontage, and an industrial area would need 125 feet of it. And that's municipal water, so industrial, the only lot that's being impacted by the industrial changes is the Sylvania site that's owned, and the Hoff's house that's owned by the town. There's no other, the industrial site that's over on Cross Street and One Pie Road, they're not serviced by municipal systems. So they don't get these incentives unless we're expanding to there.
Max, on the Route 1, I mean, this is probably a dumb question, but
Mm-hmm.
say, like on Route 1 coming down the hill past the car dealership there.
Yep.
If someone wanted to bring a McDonald's or a Walmart in to the town,
Mhm.
could they couldn't just do it, right? Would they,
Well, they'd have to go through the regular planning board process.
so they would have to,
Yeah.
but they could put a Walmart in Waldeboro?
DOT.
Yeah.
Have to go
Right.
DOT would have to weigh in on that, but yes,
Well, so
because
that
it's retail.
So, okay, and that would, okay. I'm just kidding. I wonder why one, well, there's several. Okay, sorry.
But rural and residential are back to staying 80,000 square feet for a minimum lot size, regardless of it being on sewer and water, the 200-foot road frontage, and nothing else changed. So, going on from that, under, so 6.9.4.1 is one of the first dimension, LD 2003 items to talk about. This is just explaining the affordable housing incentive that is provided if it follows the requirements for LD 2003. So, a multifamily dwelling development that is approved by the planning board as an affordable housing development may have the dwelling units at 2.5 times the minimum lot size as described in subsection 6.9.4 listed above. By way of illustration, a multifamily development approved as affordable housing development as defined by this ordinance may have 2.5 dwelling units for every 5,000 square feet if it is serviced by public water and sewer in the village district. If fractional results occur when calculating the density bonus, the number of units is rounded down to the nearest whole number. And that's explained a lot more under Article 10,
Where'd the .5 come from?
the state.
Right.
So if you have a 5,000 square foot lot, you can have 2 units. If you have
Yes.
a 10,000 square foot lot, you can have 5 units.
Yes.
Okay.
And what do you need for 3 units? Can you do the math?
Well, 2.5.
Okay, doesn't really matter, but.
Well, 15, I guess. All right, so that's the first change. So that's it for Article 6 for changes. Now we go on to Section 7.6. This is the noise ordinance. There are just a few minor changes.
Wait a minute, the .5. So, does the, can you put 2.5 times, can you put 2 units and then a small accessory unit?
You can put in an accessory unit, yeah.
That counts as a .5?
No, an accessory unit is a different thing, and I'll talk about that. And that 2.5 is only for an affordable housing project, so that's only going to be for a multifamily proposal. Like if well, let's say Volunteers of America.
Yeah.
If Volunteers of America goes through an affordable housing approval process, they would be allowed to have 2.5 units for every, well, no, that's a bad example, I'm sorry. Because I need an actual minimum lot size.
Yeah.
You have to have at least 3 units for it to be a multifamily, so that's the start of it. It has to be where multifamily is allowed. So now on to Article 7. This is Section 7.6, the noise ordinance. These are just some minor changes to try and be a little more clear on it. I followed the town of York for their noise ordinance to see what they had, and it's roughly what we already have, actually. It's just stressing you're taking the measurements using this American National Standards Institute sound level application, the latest version, and doing it at the boundary line of the person who is making the grievance. And I'm just syncing up the times, changing it from 6:30 a.m. to 8 p.m. to 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. for the construction and temporary maintenance, just because that seems weird that you're given that difference despite the abutting noise changes. I also made sure to clarify the noises required by OSHA are exempt, as well as the emergency vehicles. So the Waldoboro Police and Fire. And those are really the only changes that I have for noise that's at last second.
Okay.
If there are no other changes, the sign standards, I'm just changing and correcting the sequence that it has, starting on page 7-8 that goes to 7-9. It's just out of sync, and I'm just correcting those numbers. It's a minor grammatical item. And then 7-12 or 7.12, this is the emergency services standard. I'm just including some language to note that applications need to go to all departments, the Waldoboro Fire Chief, the Waldoboro Police Chief, and the Waldoboro EMS Chief, and all of them may make recommendations at their discretion and make other types of recommendations. In the past, we've only just had requirements for the fire department to make a recommendation, but this is just to inform all the chiefs. And the planning board may accept the recommendations that the chiefs are making. And that's it for Article 7. If there are no other changes. So then we get to Article 9, which is just the one page, 9-15. Most of the changes is just a minor item. This is correcting, changing DU and just saying dwelling units.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
For instance, restaurant 9 per 1,000 square feet,
Yep.
or 3 seats, is that the public area or is that the entire restaurant?
That it's whatever the restaurant provides. And it's whatever the planning board, the restaurant could come in and say, well, I have a 1,000 square foot restaurant, but I only have 2 seats, so I only need 1 parking space. And you could say, no, we're gonna need the 9 spots.
If we're awake, okay. Okay, because it says or the number of seats.
Right.
Which conveys the public spot, but then it says, so.
It's whatever they provide. I could make that more clear if you like.
What paragraph is this in?
This is page 9-15. The minimum required parking spaces,
Got it.
the restaurant one.
And then why
Yep,
does
thanks.
We
fast
did-
food needs to have more cars?
I think
Is
it's
that
because,
just the way it works?
I think it was, well, that was added in 2020 with the land use committee. I think the logic was there's going to be a lot more cars that are going there. But we can change those numbers if we'd like.
they're like, well, for fast food, McDonald's sure has a lot of cars, but they're all in a big loop right against the building, they're not parking spaces. So, I'm kinda curious about that. I mean, did this come from the state or something, or?
We made the changes 3 years ago. I'd have to find that out.
Okay.
Just,
Mark?
No, not on this. As soon as you're done with this, let me know. There's one thing we skipped over.
Yeah, I know. I was gonna say the affordable multifamily one. That's an LD 2003 item. So, if it is an affordable approved as a affordable housing project, they are only required to provide 2 parking spaces for every 3 dwelling units.
For every 3.
This was design
This was
standards 9.2.14.9.
whoops.
There's 2 minor changes back there.
Yes. I completely forgot about that.
No
That's
problem. I just wanted to point it out, so.
yeah, those were just some corrections. I think we had it at degrees when it's supposed to be feet, or it's the other way around.
It was NA and that got changed to 60 feet and then
This
a
is
1/4 inch foot. I think that should be, as a matter of fact, there needs to be a change on that.
oh
It should be a 1/4 inch per foot and it just says 1/4 foot.
yeah, I don't know why I don't have that page in front of me. So
Okay.
for the section that Mark is referring to, a major private street is not applicable to have, not required to have minimum standards for a lot of things. So this just makes it consistent with what the rest of
Yes.
the private roads are required to have. And then making the corrections for,
Yeah, just the
Yeah.
slope,
yeah,
the
the
crown.
grammatical items.
I got a question, Max.
Yep.
On the bed and breakfast, the proposed one, what would that be under, on land use? What would it be considered? Cafe, not a deli,
The-
what would it be?
The wine bar would be the cafe/deli item, because it's a secondary use to the bed and
I
breakfast.
mean, that's a secondary use?
Yeah.
So they would need, determining, how would you determine how many cars they need
So-
from that?
So, I know
Is
what
it
you're
not-
talking, so,
Yeah.
yeah, I'll
Sure.
quickly talk about that. So, 9-15, that was an item that was requested, that we have some type of parking standard for cafe, deli, bar. The number I found was, and I think this was, I can't remember which city it was, but it was 6 parking spaces for 1,000 square feet, or 1 for 4 parkings, or for 1 per 4 seats.
Okay.
And I put down alternative. It can just be something that the planning board can decide on a case-by-case basis, which is what we have for drive-ins.
Okay.
So we can go with the 6 for 1,000 square feet, or the 1 per every 4 seats, or we can just leave it as the planning board will determine it based on the application.
Okay.
Because of where it's located. Will end up being a huge part of it, right?
Right. Well, that's what I wanted to know from the planning board. Do you want the ones that are set in stone, or do you want it to just say determined by a case-by-case basis?
Well, I think one of the reasons we brought that up was the fact that, and I think Brandon was the one that brought it up, was if you take the tavern, for instance, they've got on-street parking. So if we had to require,
Right.
according to this, if it was a deli there or a bar,
Mhm.
then how do they fit into that whole thing? So I think that having the planning board
Or you had a
makes.
bar anywhere in the downtown or village.
Right, well, I mean, it gives you the option of saying, what are we doing for parking? You
Right.
tell us what your plans are, is that acceptable?
So does the board want the set number of parking spaces, or do you want it to just say that you will determine it based on the application that's received?
It's gotta be part of the district.
So probably a case by case.
So we have to do one or the other?
It makes sense to have one or the other. One is giving a defined set number, or the other is just you will determine what the parking space requirement is when it's provided.
I would be more apt to be flexible, because there's so many moving parts and stuff, so I would be to determine on a case to case. That would be my vote.
Well, what's everyone else's thoughts?
I got a question for you, Max, on this.
Sure.
We can't offer a variance on this item because it's not a dimensional standard, correct?
Correct, but you can provide a waiver if they request it.
That's my question. So if we have to offer a waiver, doesn't that just mean that we are saying you don't have to comply with the standard? Can we offer can we require, or, sorry, can we give a waiver that has a condition on it? Like, can we say, oh, well, yes, it does make sense that you don't need to provide all, 10 parking spaces, but you gotta have 4 parking spaces. Like, if we waive it, how do we make a requirement, there? We have to like waive it and then, do a condition of approval to require the 4 parking spaces in my example?
I believe that is what would happen. I'd
Okay.
have to confirm that with MMA because that doesn't happen that often.
Yeah, right. But if we're in a situation where we gotta kind of, case by
Right.
case everything, we're gonna wind up in that situation eventually.
Well, when it comes to a case by case, you would just
Yeah, we would
say,
be making
this is
it
the
up
number
at that
we are
point.
going to have you do.
Right.
And it's based on whatever logic you want to use.
Yeah.
Hopefully, it would have some sound logic.
If we're using case-by-case basis, it seems like we should use that phrase more often in this document.
Huh?
This is like the only place it shows up, right?
Yeah, I think that the classic example is the bed and breakfast and wine bar.
Mhm.
I mean, we've got narrow streets, there's some concerns, about parking. So therefore, having to come to the planning board and make sure that we're okay as well as the citizens makes a lot more sense to me.
Mhm.
And it simplifies it, and then, rather than putting a standard out there that they have to meet and then having to do a waiver in order
Well,
to.
like
Right.
restaurants, if you ever open another restaurant in town,
Mhm.
it should say to be determined on a case-by-case basis.
That all sounds like it's another big topic we'd have to go over about changing the parking requirements.
Yeah.
Because we have 15 minutes left on the clock, I would like.
I'm
Oh,
sorry.
sorry. I would like to try and power through as much as we can.
Okay, so come back to that.
So yeah, the cafe standard it will be to be determined on a case by case basis, and that is a housekeeping item. The affordable multifamily item, 2 parking spaces for every 3 dwelling units, that is an LD 2003 required item. So that's the only, that and the private commercials development stuff that Mark raised earlier, those are the only changes to Article 9.
So motel, hotel inn up above, it says 1 per room and for each employee on the largest ship. That's different than what we talked about at the,
Right. The
Pre-app.
Waldoboro Inn is applying as a bed and breakfast.
it's applying as a bed and breakfast, not an inn,
Right, because under our definition, it would meet the definition of a bed and breakfast.
because someone lives there.
Right.
Okay.
So are there any other changes to the affordable multifamily or the cafe deli bar?
Someone lives there, so they really need a parking space.
It- We could change it to say that 1 for the person who lives there too.
Yeah.
But it then falls, but actually it's a, where is it? Residential one, so they'd have to get the spots for that person anyways. So, all right. If there's no other changes to Article 9, we move on to Article 10, where you can see a lot of red and blue. So,
Are you trying to get this in front of the select board next week? Is that what you're trying to do?
not next week, but I really would like to try and get some.
Okay.
I think we can either try and go through the LD 2003 items, or I can at least finish the housekeeping items, and then you can say, we want to put the housekeeping items before the select board, and then LD 2003 might get delayed anyways. What are people's thoughts with 15 on the clock? Housekeeping?
Housekeeping.
Yeah.
Okay. Brendan, do you have any objection to that?
No, I do have a question though. We had talked, a few months ago about there being a drop dead to have this thing approved, and you had mentioned April to
Yes.
get it onto the June warrant.
Yes.
The planning board's meeting next week, and then I assume first week in, or second week in, April?
No,
You
so,
mean select board? is
Select
meeting
board.
next week?
Well-
Sorry,
yeah, so what's gonna happen is, assuming the planning board approves or says we approve these changes, send it off to the select board, it wouldn't be next week, it would be maybe the 28th. I'd present the changes to the select board, see if they have any final comments. They'd get the warrant article prepared, and then the town always holds a public hearing on all warrant articles, so it would be reviewed at that time for the residents.
Okay.
So I will go through the housekeeping items. The next one would be on make sure I'm not skipping that. The next one is actually in Article 10. This is page 10-48. This is for renewable energy structures for commercial use. This is just amending 10.35.1.5 to, actually, I think all of 10.35 was actually changes, but I don't know why that didn't highlight as red. Oh, geez, there's a lot that actually didn't get highlighted. Okay, 10.35, all of it is something that is being suggested for changes. So 35.1 is the decommissioning plan. This is just informing the DEP's requirement that solar farms have to get a decommissioning plan from the Maine Department of Environmental Protection. And let's see. And when it ceases operation, then it gets to 35.1.1, where it's then going over the decommissioning process and notifying the town. That includes a timeline for removing the installation no more than 6 months after the reported date of discontinued use. 35.1.3 goes over the proposed location for the disposal of all solid and hazardous materials. 35.1.4 is the remediation plans for the site to restore natural vegetation and to remove the equipment and materials up 24 inches below the surface level. That's what the state requires already for their decommissioning plans, so they would already have that information. 35.1.5 is to outline a budget for the removal of the structures and restoring the area to pre-project conditions, and the budget must be updated at least once every 10 years. The town may hire, at the applicant's expense, a qualified professional to review the estimates. That is something that some towns have already adopted as part of their solar ordinances. And then there's a performance guarantee, 35.2, going over the performance bond in the amount of 150% of the applicant's budgetary items as outlined under the previous sections. And this assurance will either be released to the applicant or the property owner upon the removal of the renewable energy system. So that way there is that financial hold in case they decide to leave without taking their stuff with them. And that's 35.2.1. If the final financial assurance is inadequate based on the updated outline, the applicant shall supplement the amount within 1 year of the update to address the difference. So obviously if inflation kicks in, they have to start putting more money into the account. And then there's abandonment, 35.3. Absent a notice of a proposed date of decommissioning or written notice of the circumstances, Town of Waldoboro retains the right to use the performance guarantee and all legal or available means necessary to cause an abandoned, hazardous, or decommissioned renewable energy system to be removed. Funds from the performance bond may be used for, but not limited to, legal fees and rehabilitation of the site. So if they run, we can get the money so that we can help fix up the site. And then construction, applicants will submit a timeline of the construction and maintenance phases, and the applicant will be responsible for providing notification to the Town of Waldoboro and abutters that includes the details of when construction is estimated to start and contact information for the project manager when there are people who have concerns to voice. And at least one notice must be sent to the listed parties in a minimum of 14 days prior to the start of construction. And that's just because of everything that's happened with the solar farms. So that's the decommissioning, that's the renewable energy systems for commercial scale. Any thoughts on that before we move on?
Does the people who decommission the site, does the town have any say on who the company that they pick, or is that up to?
It's up to the company, but they do have to report to us who's
they do?
doing this. Yeah.
Okay, so you can't just have some fly-by-night, disreputable.
Well, the DP would follow through on those.
Okay.
So if there's no other changes to that, there is the tiny homes, 10.36. This is not an LD 2003 one. This is a separate main statute. And this is just taking what the language is from the state is for tiny homes and putting it into the ordinance. Tiny homes must comply with the American National Standards Institute Standards Institute Standard A 119.5 for plumbing and safety, or they have to follow the National Fire Protection Association standards. 36.2 municipal inspection. Tiny home may be placed on a property for up to 180 days without an inspection if it is not being used for a permanent residence. If the structure becomes a permanent dwelling unit, a building permit and site inspection will be required to verify the following. That is, that the location is not violating any of the setbacks or regulations regarding a natural environment. The tiny home is placed on a stable surface, ground, or footing. All wastewater rules and requirements are met. The home is not connected to or near a device or structure that would become a fire hazard. And this is because of a lot of recent events. Any siding or other exterior features shall be residential in appearance. 36.3. No more than one tiny home may be placed on a lot unless the combined square footage of multiple tiny homes does not exceed 400 square feet. That's a weird state rule. I'm just putting it in.
Wow.
I'm very interested to see how that works with the 34 tiny home unit development that Bangor just approved in the middle of town.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
that was in the news a couple of weeks ago. I found that kind of fascinating. I had forgotten that this limit was in this change.
I'd have to see what Bangor's ordinance looks like, because some towns are doing like mobile home parks but for tiny homes, or they're
That's what this sounded like.
yeah. So it might have been that. That's how they might have skirted this. This specifically is just if I own my one lot of like 2 acres, then someone's doing their primary residential one, and another one could be put on there for an accessory dwelling unit, but combined they can't be more than 400 square feet. Again,
Right.
It's an interesting combination. But,
Yeah. Okay.
And then 36.3 is the location. Tiny homes shall be permitted to be placed or erected on an individual house lot where single-family dwellings are allowed, or as an accessory structure, subject to all applicable requirements in the land use ordinance for single-family dwellings or as an accessory structure. And that's again because state law says it has to be allowed wherever single families are allowed. So that's all the housekeeping items for Article 10. Everything else are LD 2003 requirements, which I believe we are skipping for tonight. So next is under Article 11, this is the shoreland zoning. 11.7.4.7, photographic record. This is something the state has been looking into having, but it's not fully adopted yet, but I think it's a great requirement to have. This would require applicants to take a picture of the shoreland zone site before development and then provide a picture 20 days after the site has been developed to show the comparison to the code enforcement officer or the planning board or whoever the municipal authority is at the time.
Do they do that, Max, by Google Earth?
No, as in
Regular?
go to the site and
okay,
take a
okay,
picture.
Okay.
So similar to what the people at 370 Hendrickson Lane
Okay.
would have done, they would have taken the picture first and then
Okay.
show what it would be 20 days afterwards. I think it's a great requirement. It's not required at this time, but I think it seems like a nice item to have. Any objections to it? Or-
I like it.
Okay. And then,
More than one.
and then,
One photo would be a good idea.
well, you could, when it's being approved, you can say, can we get more photos like these angles and everything? There's more flexibility to it. Then for 15, I'm probably going to be skipping a lot of the definitions because most of them are for LD 2003. Let me find where 15-6 is just including bars at the end of cafe deli, just to be consistent with the other changes that we're making. And then I feel I skipped one. I'm sorry, I skipped one. Page 15-5, bed and breakfast. This is changing it to 8 bedrooms instead of 5, because that was what was requested by the Waldoboro Inn, and the board seemed on board at the time.
I wanted to point out that I spent some time yesterday going through Maine statutes, trying to see if there was a state requirement about this, and there doesn't seem to be anything as far as breaking out what is a hotel, motel, inn, or bed and breakfast. As far as the state's concerned, it's all the same thing.
Right.
That was the way I read it.
I think when it came to the bed and breakfast, what was provided was the state fire marshal, and I can share the link. I think it's the state fire marshal would consider up to 8 or 8. No more than 8 would be a bed and breakfast, but once you go over 8, it's automatic. Even if someone's living there, it's automatically an inn. I think that's the state fire marshal, but I can confirm that and I'll send you the link.
Okay, thanks. I wasn't looking through any fire codes. I was just looking through the main statutes.
Right, and these definitions, a lot of these were done back in 2005. Some people just gave a definition and gave a number, and I think it's just a matter of no one's made too many updates to them.
Sure.
Let's see. Just making sure there's nothing else. Restricted covenant, setback requirement. Yeah, a lot of these are all LD 2003. There's no other definitions for housekeeping items. We could certainly still propose the accessory apartment one, but I think we might want, I don't know if we want to just keep it simple and clean and leave LD 2003 out of this for now.
I think that probably makes sense for the moment. I have one other housekeeping thing that I think we should consider changing.
Okay.
And I found this when we were looking at, when I was looking at something related to the email from MMA, page 5-4 and 5-5.
Oh.
The bottom of 5-4 and the top of 5-5, they talk about the definitions of the terms practical difficulty and dimensional requirements, and I think that's located in the wrong paragraph. I'm gonna switch back to land use ordinance. Looking at my
5-.
notes. Yeah, so there we go. All right, so at the top of, bottom of 5-4, it says, as used in the subsection, practical difficulty means a strict application of this ordinance to the property precludes the ability of petitioner, blah, blah, blah. And at the top of the next page, it says, as used in the subsection, dimensional requirements include but are not limited to, and it goes on. This is related to a bunch of different things within 5.3.2. For example, 5.3.2.3, action taken by petitioner. Practical difficulty is not a result of action taken by the petitioner. What I think what ought to happen is those two paragraphs that I'm talking about, where it says that both start with as used in the subsection, I think those actually belong in 5.3.2. And the reason why is the way this is written, this is clearly located within 5.3.2.6. And I don't think that that's the intent for these definitions. I think they're supposed to apply to the items up above where they're talking about practical difficulty and what was the other thing? Dimensional requirements.
Okay. Top of 5-5. The language is something that I believe comes from state statute on appeals, but I can double check to see where they're supposed to fit. I don't know if they are supposed to be the not within shoreland zone, but they might be their own standard item. I can find that and make the adjustment.
Okay. Nice.
So I'll see what the change is. Due to sync with state. Okay. Are there any other housekeeping ordinance change items? So I'll make those changes. Is there a motion from the planning board to accept the changes as amended for the select board review?
I'll make that motion.
Mark makes the motion,
I'll second that.
and Brendan makes the second. So, further discussion, and this is just to clarify, when we're talking about the housekeeping items, it is nothing associated with LD 2003, so that 2 parking spaces for every 3 units, all of this reference to affordable housing, none of that will be sent off to the select board at this time. This is only the housekeeping items that we have discussed tonight.
Okay.
Any discussion? Any more discussion?
Hearing none. Motion to, or not a motion, all those in favor?
Aye.
Mar- Brendan has his hand up, everyone at the town office has their hand up, that's 4-0. All right, so that will be the land use ordinance amendments, I'll send that off to the select board. Second to last item, comments from the planning board, any other thoughts? I haven't received any site plans just yet from anyone, so who knows what April looks like, it might be one of those last minute things that I always love so much, and have to rush at last second to get things put out to the board, so we'll see what happens.
The bed and breakfast people aren't coming next month?
I have not heard anything from them. They are working on addressing the parking
Okay.
requirement.
Okay.
That's why they weren't here tonight.
Because the parking, I went down to reconnoiter the area, I had some business at the Polo Covers, and if you had one parking on one side of the street, close to there.
Oh, yeah.
And then just have that little piece of school one way,
Mhm.
I think that would work.
It's,
Because you could go down and then you could still go all the way down, or take that left and then come out Glidden.
How does changing street directions work? What happens?
Yeah,
Is
yeah,
you
that's what I
go
was-
in front of the select board?
it's a
What do
select board matter, and I think it might be town overall. I'm not too sure. It's not like it happens every day.
Right.
There's a traffic ordinance, you'd have
Yeah.
to make the change to the traffic ordinance, and I'm a little unclear who can do that, I would assume it's a public vote.
Yeah, I'd have to check, 'cause I feel it's a public vote, but I feel it's a town-wide vote, but at the same time, I feel they made a change to it that only required the select board to amend it because there was the parking bans in the winter. I'd have to check with Julie on that. So,
Okay.
any other thoughts, comments? Thoughts on the weather? Hearing none. Is there a motion to adjourn?
There's a motion to adjourn.
Barbara is motioning to adjourn.
Second.
Second from Mark. And we're good. All right, good night, everyone.
Good night.
Max, do you wanna talk about this, erosion plan?
Yeah, let me stop the recordings and everything.
Yep.
1 sec.